He's 50% ice, 50% ground, and 100% swine. His kind has wandered the world thousands of years ago during the Ice Age, and now he's ready to ice the competition and make Eos Island his new stomping grounds. Welcome to the Pokemon Unite Character Spotlight, featuring Mamoswine, the Twin Tusk Pokemon. Mamoswine is categorized as a lockdown defender who specializes in initiating fights and protecting teammates with an arsenal of destructive abilities. To get the best out of this Pokemon, Mamoswine requires experienced trainers who can balance initiating fights, capitalizing on opponents' misplays, and protecting key teammates in the thick of battle. Due to the mysterious powers of Eos energy, Mamoswine begins each match as a Swinub, eventually evolving into Piloswine, and finally into Mamoswine as the match goes on.
Ready, go!
Swinub's passive is Thick Fat and is kept throughout his evolution into Piloswine and Mamoswine. Whenever this Pokemon deals damage, their defense and special defense increase for a short time, up to a cap. Any additional damage dealt will refresh the duration of the passive, and if the buff expires before Swinub can deal damage again, all defensive bonuses are lost. Thick Fat also causes goal hoops to freeze when this Pokemon creates freezing zones on ally goal zones, but more on that later. Swinub's basic attacks become boosted every third attack and after using Ice-type moves, dealing bonus damage and freezing enemies for a very brief moment. Additionally, this Pokemon's basic attacks will deal increased damage to enemies that are recently frozen by him for a time. Swinub's basic abilities are Ice Shard and Tackle. Ice Shard hurls 3 chunks of ice at a designated location, dealing damage each time the shard lands and slowing enemies hit for a short time. If an enemy is hit by all 3 parts of the ability, they are left frozen for a brief moment. If the ability is cast on top of your own goal zone, the 3rd shard will freeze the goal hoops, slowing any scoring attempts by the enemy team's Pokemons for a significant duration. Swinub's second basic ability is Tackle, a straightforward move that has him dash a fixed distance in a direction over any obstacles, dealing damage and tossing up any enemies hit for a brief moment. At level 5, Swinub evolves into Piloswine and forgets Ice Shard to learn either Ice Fang or Icicle Crash. If Piloswine learns Ice Fang, he imbues his tusk with ice and thrusts them forward in the designated direction. If the ability hits an enemy Pokemon, Piloswine encases them in ice, picks them up, and then slams them down a fixed distance away, leaving them frozen for a moderate duration. While the enemy Pokemon is lifted into the air, Piloswine can choose to drop them either in front of him or behind him. Enemy Pokemon caught in the slam's area of effect will also take damage and be left frozen for a moderate duration. If Piloswine slams down the target into his own goal zone, it will freeze the goal hoops, slowing the scoring speed of opponents for a significant duration. When the ability upgrades at level 11, it increases the size of the freezing slam's area of effect. Ice Fang is a great tool for quickly locking down a single target with some room for collateral damage, but its true strength comes from the displacement of enemy Pokemon. Piloswine can quickly snag and throw opponents away from safety and into the waiting hands of your allies for a swift knockout, or remove enemy Pokemon that might be causing trouble for your teammates. However, due to its short range, you'll have to find ways to either close the gap with your other abilities, ambush unsuspecting enemies from bushes, or wait for them to come to you. The total crowd control duration, including the boosted basic attack following this move, along with any follow-up abilities you might use, makes it a devastating ability to stop any Pokemon in their tracks. If you'd rather rain ice from above, Piloswine can instead learn Icicle Crash. Piloswine drops a few small icicles in an area followed by a larger one that shatters after a set time. Enemies hit by the smaller icicles take damage and are slowed, and take even more damage and become frozen for a short time if they're in range of the icicle's shatter. The icicle acts as an obstacle that prevents movement through it until it eventually shatters or is shattered by one of Piloswine's other abilities or boosted basic attacks. Like with Ice Fang, if the icicle shatters on top of your own goal zones, the ability freezes the goal hoops, slowing the scoring speed of any opponent Pokemon for a significant duration. If the icicle is shattered by Tackle or high horsepower, it creates a small icy field that increases the movement speed of allies that run over it. When this move upgrades at level 11, the final Icicle will also stun enemies very briefly when it lands. Icicle Crash is an incredibly versatile tool that can be used in a variety of situations. It is one of few abilities that has little to no delay between activation and damage dealing, making it a great ability to try and knock out contested wild Pokemon or to deal damage from afar. The ability is also a great zoning tool, as the large icicle creates a danger zone for the enemies that they'll want to avoid lest they become frozen when the icicle shatters. Successfully freezing an enemy from a distance can lead to an easy pick by your teammates or an easy follow-up from you to further lock down enemy Pokemon. Icicle Crash can also be used defensively to protect your goal zones from a range. The multiple instances of damage from this ability, followed by the crowd control and goal freezing effect of the Icicle Shatter, makes it very difficult for opponents to score and can give you and your teammates the time to mount a counterattack. Once Piloswine hits level 7, it's time to replace Tackle with a ground type ability. After Piloswine learns Earthquake, he gains the ability to leap into the air after a moderate windup and land forcefully, dealing damage to enemies in an area around him, pulling them towards him and stunning them for a moderate duration. And when Earthquake upgrades at level 13, the ability's pulling power is strengthened and also slows enemies' movement speed for a moderately long duration after they are hit by this move. In a vacuum, landing an Earthquake on an enemy may prove difficult due to its long windup time. But it is important to note that Earthquake windup time is uninterruptible. This means that most crowd control effects that occur after you use this ability but before you jump are effectively nullified. In an ideal scenario, Earthquake can force multiple enemy team members to clump together for your allies to clean up with devastating area abilities. So in order to ensure you can take advantage of its utility, use this ability when enemies are already under other crowd control effects, or use this ability from bushes to increase your odds of success. Alternatively, you can try to predict how your enemies will move to shake things up. If you'd rather not see the pigs fly, Piloswine can forget Tackle to learn High Horsepower. Piloswine charges in a designated direction, rears up, then stomps the ground with great force. Enemies in the way of the charge are shoved in the same direction and become stunned for a moderate duration if they're trampled under his stompers. Once Piloswine starts his charge, he can't stop, won't stop. Piloswine will always attempt a full charge and stomp, even if he is displaced or stunned or runs out of runway. And while the charge portion of High Horsepower cannot traverse obstacles, the lunge from the stomp can hop over small walls, so be mindful when aiming this ability. However, if High Horsepower is used into Icicle Crash, Piloswine will end his charge early and ready his stomp. At level 13, Mamoswine's charge becomes faster and his stomp stuns Pokemon for slightly longer than before. High Horsepower's ability to shove multiple Pokemon a fair distance and stun them should not be understated. Depending on your positioning, you can use this ability offensively to shove Pokemon into your teammates, defensively to shove enemy Pokemon away from your teammates, or keep them pinned against obstacles to hinder them. Use this ability into Icicle Crash to limit the distance you travel and freeze and stun your enemies while doing some serious damage. When Piloswine finally evolves into Mamoswine at level 9, he learns his Unite move, Mammoth Mash. After a delay, Mamoswine jumps to a designated location, then repeatedly stomps the ground, dealing damage and briefly decreasing enemies' movement speed, with the final stomp throwing enemies into the air. During this time, Mamoswine is immune to hindrance, and after the initial jump can move around to adjust where his final stomp will be. Mammoth Mash gives this Pokemon another avenue of damage and crowd control to its already loaded arsenal. It can cause enemies to scatter in all directions in order to avoid the damage and knockup, splitting their teammates in a way that makes it easier for you and your teammates to pick up targets individually. However, because the knockup effect is at the end of a very telegraphed and long-winded ability, it gives the opponents time to potentially avoid it. For this reason, Mammoth Mash is often best used from bushes to ambush several enemies at once, or as a follow-up while enemies are already under crowd control effects to make it a graveyard smash. Be careful, auto-aiming this Unite move out in the open may leave you mashing nothing but air. Swinup's starting abilities are best utilized in lane with a partner. His passive, Thick Fat, makes him deceptively bulky in a fight, as he builds more resistances the more damage he does, so don't be afraid to start skirmishes. However, fighting when you have teammates with you who can capitalize on your initiation and crowd control will often yield better results than trying to do everything on your own. This is a team battle after all. Tackle and Ice Shard are both amazing crowd control tools that can help to secure wild Pokemon or get the jump on enemy laners. If your goal zones are being pushed, use Ice Shard or any of its upgrades to prevent and slow opponents from scoring on your goals. As you and your abilities evolve in the mid-game, carefully consider what ability combination you want to take based on your team's and opponent's composition. If you want to get up close and personal, Ice Fang is a great source of hindrance, displacing enemy Pokemon into unfavorable situations. Used with high horsepower, you can further displace enemies to turn their bad situations into a worse one, or further hinder them by using Earthquake either before or after using Ice Fang. On the other hand, Icicle Crash allows you to deal damage from afar and lets you pick your engagements with a little more flexibility. Paired with Earthquake, the combination of the two abilities can hinder and group multiple enemies into one place for your allies' AoE abilities to clean them up. Alternatively, if you want to take damage into your own hands, Icicle Crash into high horsepower can deal a deceptive amount of damage that should have your enemies thinking twice about picking a fight with you. Keep an eye out for opportunities to engage, but choose your battles carefully, and make sure your team is close behind you. Mamoswine may be bulkier than most other Pokemon, but likes to sustain in any meaningful ways to escape after charging in. A poor engagement may leave you pork chopped. Remember, your job as a defender is not necessarily to knock out Pokemon, but to set up your team for success by protecting teammates and hindering opponents. When it comes to fighting around major objectives, take a stance between the objective and the enemy team to try and zone them away. Be sure to keep a watchful eye on those who are most likely to attempt to steal, and prevent them from doing so using your arsenal of crowd control and displacement abilities. When it comes to the late game, it's important to keep an eye on the minimap to keep tabs on where everyone is. As a trainer, you'll want to be flexible and be able to quickly adapt to different situations, prioritizing the safety of your teammates and hindering opponent Pokemon. Position yourself on the front lines and look out for opportunities to punish enemy Pokemon who are out of position. Chain your ice and ground type moves along with Mammoth Mash to lock down the enemy team while your team capitalizes on your crowd control. Remember, Thick Fat allows you to go ham as long as you continue to deal damage, so try to stay active in the fight.
Time's up!
If you're ready to go whole hog and join the Swine Gang, head over to the Unite Battle Committee on Eos Island and check out your Unite license for Mamoswine, the Twin Tusk Pokemon.